Hey everyone, this is Tyler from Craft and Tailored, and in this episode of Under the Radar, we are going over Zodiac watches, most specifically the Seawolf. I have a couple of different variants here to go over, but it's just going to be kind of like a general overview of why I think they're interesting watches just to begin with, but also how I think that they're one of the watches that has a lot of room to grow, especially for this price point. So we see the first Zodiac Seawolf come into production in 1953, which is the same year as the Rolex Submariner and the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. And believe it or not, these were actually one of the largest competitors for those brands at the time because just the way that these watches were produced was a lot more affordable to just the normal sport enthusiast, even though they did have a lot of professional applications as well. But they were really popular just in the sort of like mid to late 50s and into the 60s and 70s is where you kind of really see the brand shine. And a lot of these Seawolves actually come out of military PXs with provenance, with just some really interesting history. So they really had a very professional application to them, even though that they were a little bit more of an accessible timepiece for the everyday person. Navy SEALs use these, underwater demolition teams use these watches. So they were definitely one of the more durable diving watches that were created in this era. And I think that they're one of the more interestingly designed watches from this era just in general. And the first one I kind of want to talk about is the 722-916. This is kind of the classic Zodiac dive watch of what a lot of people think of, with the sort of like steel-plated brass bezels that kind of take on those cool patinas, glossy black dials, the triangle hour markers that are printed with Arabic numerals, date at the 3 o'clock. The non-date version would be the 702-916, and those are very desirable as well. But I like these because it really just kind of gives you that sort of late 60s, early 70s skin diver feel. It's, you know, a really comfortable watch to have on wrist, and it's not too small and it's not too big. It's kind of like a really sort of perfectly sized watch, especially for its size. The 722-916s can be found with bracelets, but they look really good on straps as well. And they kind of have like this really classic sort of aesthetic of the vintage skin diver. I love the large window Dauphine hands that are loomed. And all the looms on these sort of vintage Zodiacs kind of went like this very distinctive green color, which is just kind of visually really interesting, especially for watches from this era. And I have two other ones that I want to go over as well. They're the same reference, but they're very different. Both of them are 722-946Bs. And this is where you kind of see Zodiac come into its own. These are like the very classic Zodiac divers with really bright colors, really interesting sort of dial characteristics, without, you know, going too out of left field. Having these side by side is a really good representation of sort of like the risks, or maybe not necessarily risks, but just how Zodiac was willing to differentiate their watches within their own reference ranges. And I think that caters to just a very collectible just watch in general, especially if you have sort of like these different sort of variants. It's kind of like a Rolex GMT, how it has like the Mark 1, the 2, the 3, and each one kind of has its own level of collectability within that sort of range. I see that being very similar here with the Zodiac Seawolves, because within one reference range, you can have, you know, a different style bezel, a different set of hands, a different dial, a different sort of bracelet. So I think all of that sort of adds up together to make each one sort of specifically special in its own right, but also collectible, because with each sort of sub-variant or sort of variation within a variation, for a reference range, you're going to create a collectability level, but also a sense of scarcity for each sort of small variation. And I personally just like these ones both. You know, one of them has a really tropical dial, the other one has like really bright orange accents, and they're just completely different looking watches, even though they are the same exact reference. So just recently I've been noticing sort of the increase in desirability and also awareness around these vintage dive watches, these Zodiac Seawolves. And I also personally am very invested in them and interested in them. All three of these watches actually come out of my personal collection, and I think I own 6 total Zodiac watches. So I am a pretty big fan of just the brand in general, but through that process of sort of like collecting these and looking into them and researching them over the past year or so, I've seen a lot of different just, you know, variations in these, but also more people are talking about them. There's more interesting options that are becoming to sort of surfacing that other people didn't necessarily know existed before, or, you know, nobody really cared about this brand a couple of years ago. So in the next couple of years, I definitely see the vintage Seawolf range of watches just kind of growing immensely. We're already sort of starting to see it happen. You know, we see other dealers, other publications sort of writing about these watches now. And there's a lot of really cool, like, just different variants out there that, you know, are just now being discovered. And I think there's kind of like a Zodiac watch for everybody. So something that sort of fits anybody's personality. And just in general, they're really sort of utilitarian, rugged sort of dive watches that come from a really important era just for that history. Most of these watches you can find in the $1,000 range, sub $2,000 range. If there's something that's really special, it may be a little bit more than that, but I definitely see them growing to a much higher value just in the next few years, because so with their sort of historical relevance and you know, how they're used for military applications, and just so there are many different variants within different references, I think just make these watches super collectible as a whole. And it's still not really known yet that these watches have a lot of these characteristics tied to them, but I don't see that, you know, lasting for too much longer, just because of, you know, the nature of these watches and the nature of how things trend on the internet. So with that, thank you for watching. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed. Comment down below if you have an under the radar watch you think I should talk about in a future episode. Subscribe for more content just like this. Follow us on Instagram at @CraftinTailored. And if you have watch questions, we are happy to help. You can email us directly at info@craftintailor.com. And we'll see you in the next one.